Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast for leaders driven to leave a positive mark through their leadership.
I hope that I will have created some ways in which the circumstances of your birth don't predict the opportunities you have in your life.
I'm Josh Huggins, your host and the founder of GS2 Partnership, a search firm committed to connecting visionaries dedicated to environmental and social betterment.
I have two young sons. I want to be able to tell them I did use the resources and expertise of a company to try to create more awareness about climate change.
In each episode, we delve into the minds of executive and future leaders. We discuss how sustainability guides responsible leadership, sparks change, and drives value.
The way of thinking I try and advocate is for us all to think about us having a collective problem to fix, which is climate, and that we need to rebuild our global economy.
We are GS2, and we are on a critical journey to connect to those who believe in leaving the world better than we found it.
So hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Better Than We Found It, the podcast dedicated to purpose-driven leadership. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Shelley Copsey. It's been a long time coming. Shelley and I have worked together over a number of years and Shelley is the CEO of FYLD. Shelley, prior to this I've done a little introduction to you, but I can never do it justice. So it would be great if you could give me an overview of yourself and also FYLD and who you are.
Yep. So as you said, Shelley Copsey, I'm CEO and one of the co-founders of FYLD. At FYLD, we work with workers that are in safety critical industries, remote workforces, and we enable them to do their jobs more effectively and, really importantly, more safely. How did I come here? I guess Australian born, as you can tell by my accent. I've been in the UK for about 5 years. Background, I started out as an accountant. I came through consultancy firms and eventually found my way into the technology sector. On the more private side of life, I'm a mum to two beautiful boys who are 12 and 14.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to dive into all of that in more detail. So let's go all the way back to your early years and growing up in Australia. What was life like then? And I suppose if you can recount your childhood, how clear were you around sort of the path you wanted to take in your career? And was career something that you were always driven to do?
Early childhood was spent in Adelaide, which would probably be best described as a big country town. When I was younger, it's much bigger now. Lots of time spent on sport. My father was a tennis fanatic and would have me out playing 5 times a week, as well as a lot of netball. So I think very early on I was told, have focus, apply yourself strongly, practice your skills, practice your arts. That's, always been a bit of a part of my story. And as I got a bit older, as I hit my teenage years, again, my father, who's probably had a very strong influence on my life, he worked in a university and he was very focused on where do you want to get to in life, keep your options open, choose subjects, etc., that will let you have a broad-based career. And I think I've been exceptionally lucky to have that background. So, excuse me, from an early age, I think I always knew that I wanted to get into business. Always loved maths, but I do actually really remember once being on a business trip with my father in Singapore, and it was a graduation ceremony for a university, and there were quite a lot of successful Asian business people here. And again, my dad being my dad set me up to have some discussions with them about how my career could prosper. And, whether in the era of AI this holds true or not, they said to me quite a lot, maths is great, Shelley, but if you want to make money and if you want a successful and interesting career, we reckon you should go down the commerce path. And, rightly or wrongly, I guess it's led to a great career. I did go down that path. And I think probably from about the age of 15 or 16, I was quite fixated on how could I learn the basics of how business operates, which is what accounting gave me. But then also as I began to progress, it was more about learning about technology, change, and how to build value, which is probably the areas that I thrive in most today.
Sure. So I suppose just to unpick that a little bit more. So it sounds like there was, even at that early age, was quite a plan to learn business and then springboard into these other areas. Is that correct, or was it something that happened more by chance?
I would say it was a little bit of both. I think what I always learned, and I talk to a lot of the younger generations coming through on this, is get really good building blocks And I think I always had that approach of, if I have an open mind, if I'm open to opportunity, if I'm open to great coaching, I'm going to build a really broad base. I didn't necessarily know that I would end up in technology and what I do today. I did always know that, when you go into a consulting firm, lots of people aim to be partner, and you get more and more specialised and more focused. I always knew that for me, doing something for 30, 40, 50 years was not what I wanted. I just knew that if I was open and I did different things, I'd build a really great foundation, which as my career progressed, into my mid-30s, I'd get chances to do really exciting things. And I think that that's what's paid dividends for me during my career.
Sure. So exciting things were the forward-looking plan, but you started in something that maybe others may not call so exciting in tax. So tell us a bit around that more traditional path, and what were those early years like? Was it KPMG you started with?
Yeah, I started at KPMG and moved on to PwC. And, at the time, a very male-dominated industry. There weren't so many of us, females that worked in the teams that I was in. I think it was interesting. I was always very lucky in my career that I had strong sponsorship. I didn't often have female role models, but I had lots of strong sponsorship from, senior males in the team, which I think I was lucky with. But I think as well, when I look back to my career, I always gravitated to working with people that were commercially focused. And when you work in tax, that's not always the case. It's an industry that makes a lot of money through giving advice on tax structuring. But for me, again, if I think back to wanting a career that had a lot of opportunity and variability, I thought if I gravitated towards working with people who were looking at their customers' strategic objectives commercially, I would learn a lot more than just, the tax area that I worked in. And actually quite interestingly, what happened to me is that PwC became a customer or client of mine when I was still in the client advisory practice. And again, it really did open those opportunities that people saw some different skills in me that let me go into an in-house role and begin to build a career outside of that technical area of expertise.
So just to be clear, when you were doing the advisory work within PwC as the internal client, they were an internal client for you. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, they were. I mean, I think people often don't think about these consultancies that are actually big businesses of their own. And, PwC was becoming highly acquisitive and their strategy was expanding. And, so eventually I ended up, I was working for the chair of the board of partners at the time in the tax practice, but it led to advisory opportunities for the firm itself.
Sure. And I suppose the $1 million question for lots that perhaps are thinking about this type of consulting route, what did you see as the main differences between KPMG and PwC, and why did you make the shift across?
Oh, it's many years ago, and I wouldn't say I'd look at this at the firms at a global level, but if you just go back to why do people stay and why do people leave, this is something that's very dear to my heart as a leader. I went through a period where you had very normal promotional cycles, et cetera, and the teams that I was working in, the leadership was in a bit of turmoil at that particular point in time. And we weren't getting the coaching and development that you want in your career, particularly when you're junior. So I would say, again, I look back at those people. They were wonderful, great leaders. Just, there was a bit of flux. And someone else came along at that right point in time. I got the phone call on the day where I was probably feeling unhappy, and it opened a new opportunity to go somewhere where they were actually really highly focused on building a team and building a future with some new people in it. I reflect on that one heavily with my team and with my leadership team at FYLD. You have to think about in every moment, is my team feeling engaged with the business? People will have down days, but you can always build goodwill in the tougher times as well. You've got to build a team that's resilient so that when those phone calls come in, your team's actually my future's here. I think it's exceptionally important that regardless of what's going on at a leadership level, that on a daily basis, you have that absolute focus on your team.
For sure, yeah. I see it as almost like a sort of bank account. I was told once it's like you should see the relationship like a bank account, and in the good times, if you're loading it up and you're putting your savings in there, you create this buffer, because there will always be bad times. But the bad times, you need to stay cash positive. You don't want people going into their overdraft, because if they're in the overdraft, when they get that call from a pesky recruiter like myself, they're much more open to talk when they're in the overdraft. So I think if you can think of it as a leader always of trying to really focus on the good times and build those, you're going to have bad days, but you've got enough of a buffer to overcome them and override them.
Yeah, you do. The other thing I often think about, Josh, as well, like, as leaders, you can't always promote people when they wanted the promotion. You can't always give them the pay rise they wanted. And sometimes the performance incentive isn't earned, right? But even in those moments, you can still deposit into that bank account if it's a coaching moment, and you help them see some changes that they can make that will, drive them forward. And again, I always try to think about, in the great times, how do we deposit? And in the bad times, how do I make sure that I've got empathy, but I'm building resilience in the person that I care about their future? I think if you kind of take that holistic approach, you tend to build a really good, resilient team.
Sure. And I know it sounds like you really took your career into your own hands with the progression pathways that you want, but not having role models at the time you were there, I suppose, must have been a little bit of a challenge. What did these other individuals that were key for you in your progression and development do, and how did you facilitate those discussions? Because I do speak to some people sometimes where they feel at a bit of a loss. Perhaps their own line manager isn't giving them what they need in order to step outside their comfort zone. So I suppose two questions: how did you get these individuals to support you, and two, what did they do that helped progress you and make you think of things from a different perspective?
I think, the best career advice I can give people, and this comes from the mouths of people way more clever and successful than me, but every day do what you promised to do and do it that little bit better than what you promised, right? So it's that consistency piece. I think my whole career I've always not under-promised and over-delivered, but probably over-promised a little bit and then over-delivered, right? And I think that it's just up to individuals to set that basic bench that they're a valuable team member and to build a permission to ask. If I go back to my 20s, and people that didn't know me then often laugh when they hear this, I was reasonably shy and quiet. I'd find myself sitting in a boardroom looking at some new piece of legislation, and there'd be like 3 women at the table, 27 men. We were often back in that time taught that gravitas was about a loud voice. It wasn't necessarily about the best insight, and that could be really quite tough, right? But again, I think because I'd built that foundation as someone who really delivered for my clients in a less maybe confronting environment as a young woman in a professional environment, it also gave me the opportunity to ask people about how can I overcome this fear of looking stupid, not saying the right thing. Best bit of coaching, I've recounted this story a few times that people gave me. It was over prepare, find your 3 or 4 points and just have the courage to put forward one. But I just go back to the basics, that because I was delivering for the business, I could go to 2 or 3 people that I trusted and who knew that I was competent, and actually be able to be a bit vulnerable with them about what some of my fears were, things that I thought might hold me back. Whereas I think if you're not feeling like you're delivering, it's harder to ask for the help that you need, because then people begin to be a little bit, well, this person doesn't always say what they're asking for, plus they're now telling me what they're not good at. So there's a little bit of just, earning your stripes and earning the ability to ask.
Sure, understand. So I'm keen to understand then, you were doing this internal kind of role, and then how did the innovation or disruption area come to be for you, and what did that progression look like in order to move into that type of position?
Yeah, so I was client facing until I had my first son, and whilst I was pregnant with them, that was actually when there was a real step change in the strategic objectives of the firm I was working for. And I was asked when I returned to come in-house. And, originally, again, it was still like a tax technical role. I think, again, though, what I brought when I went inside was, if you work in client land and you're charging a lot of money an hour, you've got a mentality of, how will I get something done? I have to find a way. I think I brought a different level of thinking to some of the challenges that were emerging in the firm, which just, again, let some senior leaders look at me and say, actually, this person could be good to take into our strategy and innovation team. And I was asked to go into the corporate innovation team, and initially, actually, like as commercial director. So I got that first broader step. It's still largely financial, still commercial, but it was that first step towards something different. And again, I just embraced that with open arms. It's a little bit nervy. You've had a successful career in a technical discipline. You get that real reward cycle, green tick right, red tick wrong when you're working with numbers. And to shift from that to commercial strategy is harder. Right, there's a little bit more of a long game. Will my decisions pay off? Am I good at this? But just, back to myself, and again, spent a lot of time with people that had been there longer. asking for feedback. I think I've also spent time understanding how I take feedback in and I communicate that to people. I ask heaps of questions. Sometimes people see that as me rebutting. I've also learned that I've got to say to them, it's not me rebutting, I just really need to understand, and then I can go away and process and be different. Again, though, like I think communication is such a skill to have, because if you can tell people how you learn, they'll view how you're behaving quite differently. But anyway, I digress. I was invited into there.
Yes.
In some ways, I think to take a look at what was happening, to be a sensible pair of hands that could report back a little bit. And I just found that I fell in love with innovation, with technology, and disruption. If you kind of go back to my childhood days, I was always taught and suggested to go down a path that was I guess like quite fixed and non-creative to some extent. And it was funny, I think as I got a little bit older after I had children, I began to have a bit more confidence in myself and I began to place more value on some of the creative skills I could bring to the table. So from there I did leapfrog into running a venture for PwC, completely out of my depth. I look back to this day and wonder what on earth possessed me in the moment to say yes when I was asked. But with hindsight, right, the best career decision I ever made. What I did find though after a year or two is that when you're working in a consultancy and technology, if you're not a technologist by background, you're probably not learning deeply enough about the technology to have the career that I have today. So I made a choice to go and work at Australia's data science agency when I saw a role come up there that they offered me, leading commercialisation of data technology. And again, I credit that as one of the best decisions I've made because I got the chance to go deep and really learn about technology at a fundamental level. And my career now really couples the technology aspect with the deep commercial focus that I did for my first 15 years.
Yeah, so there was something that you said there around you look back and you're not quite sure what possessed you to make that move. We have these conversations on a very regular basis with individuals when they're at that sort of point of their career where it's like, what is the next step? And on the podcast, I had a lady called Ruth Hancock, who's now the CEO of Octopus Money. Really interesting lady, but her piece of advice was just say yes. When these opportunities come up, even if you don't think that you're ready or you can't do them, if the opportunity is so much more to say yes and fail than to not try at all. And I think that that's a really important lesson for people to learn when they're in, especially when you're in those stages where actually you've got more time to fail. You've got the ability to fail and still be good at something else. But if you don't push yourself to that perspective, you'll never then move beyond. So I think that's really a really interesting point. And then I think secondly, how did you manage the mindset shift from going from something that was so externally facing into the internal piece? And as you say, having to understand slightly differently that the levers or the drivers were not the same as when you're in pure out and out client facing consulting. What did you see as some of the challenges there?
I think the biggest one is that when you're working in advisory, you don't ever have to fully execute on what you advise. And I think that the biggest learning I had very quickly was, as an advisor, you tell people this. When you're doing, you realise that you've got to bite things off in chunks, right? And I would say that maybe my biggest learning in my first year was like the size of my ambition and what can you actually do as an executor in the space of 12 months. And I very much learned how do I make things way more simple than what I would have done as an advisor. How do I put them into bite-sized chunks? But that first year of going from telling people what to do to doing it myself, gosh, there were some really hard lessons learned. I think everybody I speak to that was a consultant and eventually goes in-house, they say the same. It was like, almost like a year of absolute accelerated learning. But then I think the other thing I found is because I went into venturing, and I say this to a lot of younger people that join us, I will be forever grateful for the very structured training that I got in consultancy. And, I almost recommend to so many people, if they get that opportunity, go for it, because there's nothing like what those firms give you. But then people always start thinking about, do I do the MBA or not? if you start running ventures, you almost do an MBA by doing versus via study. And so I think even though I was in a big organization, different stakeholders and all sorts of different pressures to manage, I was actually learning how to run a whole business within that organization. So actually in some ways, I learned a lot by doing in a very short period of time, which is, an immense privilege.
And it seems like you were on a pretty clear trajectory and pathway within PwC for where you'd got to and the success that you'd had. So taking that step away, I suppose, must have also been a big challenge to do. The technical understanding I get, I suppose, but did you see the longer term view following that? Was that something that was part of a pathway to what you're doing now when you made that decision, or how did you sort of justify in your mind why that was the right step for you?
I think two things. I'd been doing, accounting, tax style roles for maybe 12, 15 years when I made the move. And I just knew in my heart of hearts that was not me forever. I needed more variety in my life. And I'd also maybe reached a point where advising others was not giving me the same fulfillment as when I'd been a bit younger. I wanted to do more of an executional role. So there were some bits that were natural, but then there were some bits where I think I didn't really quite know what I was getting myself into. But I just, if I go back to the quote you made before, right, it's about just saying yes. And if people that I trusted and that I thought were really talented saw something in me that made them go, she could be successful, there's a bit about trusting the network that you've built around you. And I think that's how I moved into this. At the same time, I guess one of the other perspectives I've had through my career, if you take away the technical discipline, it's about how do you future-proof yourself to be a valuable, employee, contributor into the future. And when I began to get involved in technology, and, it's probably about 2010, 2012 by then, we're all really beginning to see that the future is going to be technology dominated. So I think a big chunk of the decision-making for me was this wasn't something like almost high risk. Would there be a future in technology? It was more, this particular venture might not succeed, but if I go to your point, if I fail, have I learned heaps of stuff to propel myself forward? In that regard, I kind of saw it as a bit of a no-brainer, which de-risked it, to some extent as a career move.
Sure. Yeah, makes sense. So tell me more about the firm that you joined, because I don't think that we've spoken about this before. So who were they and what was the role?
So I joined the CSIRO, which is Australia's national research agency. Globally, they're one of the top research agencies that exist, but they've got many, many practices that work in, the natural sciences, real world sciences. At the time I joined, they were establishing their data science business or research arm. It was like a legacy research organisation that they'd brought into almost the mothership of the Australian Research Organisation. That was called Data 61. So there were about 1,000 PhDs or so that worked in that business unit. My role was quite expansive. In the first instance, we had commercialised and spun off multiple companies, and I was running their investment fund that looked after all of those investments, which kind of is what took me to the place I'm in now. But I was also working with people across that research spectrum to look for technologies that could be commercialisable and that could be put into new companies. So I was successful. I think I got 6-8 companies established there within 2 years, got them funded, in conjunction with the researchers, and spun them out so that they could begin to build new economic value for the country. And then the third thing that I did there was work with a lot of companies in Australia's ASX 200, so, the top companies, to help them begin to understand how AI would impact business in Australia and try and help them progress along that journey faster. But if I just go back to that first point, it was really managing the investment portfolio. I just fell in love with a company. And again, this is when you look at leaning into opportunities in your career that pop up. It was a company that had great technology. It wasn't funded well, and it didn't really have that longer term strategy. And, as I got put onto the board of that company, I just, began to love what it was doing and threw my hat in the ring eventually when the CEO role came up. And, again, it's that piece about you can often be in the right place at the right time, but it's not enough. You've got to be willing to put yourself forward and say, I'd like to have a go at this opportunity.
Sure. And I can see how with Data 61 and as you say, the venture part of it, the technology, what it's doing, it makes sense now where you are. So understanding that's really useful. So is this so was this organisation focusing on purely the technology, or was it the technology and then the types of sectors that the technology was supporting?
It was a bit of a mix. There was a lot of general purpose research, right? So, cybersecurity, robotics, artificial intelligence, there'd be general research platforms. But then a lot of what Data 61 and the mothership CSIRO did was work with Australian industry and do research projects with them to help them, improve their products, improve their business. The ambition of that organisation is to further, Australia's economy and build industry for the country, understanding that so much of the world in the future is, science backed.
Sure. And back then, so what are we talking here? 2015, 16 sort of time, or maybe a bit later?
Yeah.
Yeah,
a fraction later, Mum.
AI.
Came to the UK.
Yeah, I was thinking so AI technology and these other areas, computer science, is something that was clearly happening, but it must have been quite a nascent stage of the journey and perhaps not so well known. What was it like to be part of that industry and movement at that point before it's become so mainstream?
I think it was super exciting, right? I think when I landed at Data 61, I actually had my eyes opened to how advanced AI science was already. You didn't necessarily at that point in time just see it, not obviously in your day-to-day life. And then, to begin to see some of the projects that we would be working on, it was really exciting, world-leading researchers to partner with. But then also it was the culture of the organisation. I found that shifting from consultancy to a research organisation, chalk and cheese on culture, right? How do you get people to do what you need them to do in an organisation where they want to follow a research program and you're being asked to commercialise technologies? I had to learn entirely different ways to engage and try and achieve what I wanted to. But, I think I will always look back at that 2.5 years and be immensely grateful that, firstly to work for your country's government effectively and to give something back to the public. I think that that's an amazing thing to do in your career. But secondly, to work with some of those world-leading researchers and be inspired by both their capability but the generosity of the way that they'll operate with you. It was incredible.
Sure. And I suppose thirdly, for introducing you to your next firm and the opportunity there that came up. So tell us more about that and that role and what that was.
Yeah, so that was a company called Geoslam. If you think about, the real world now and anybody that's operating physical infrastructure in the real world, everybody's got what we call the digital twin, right? Where you've gone and created a map of the assets, etc., and what they are. When I joined Geoslam and the technology that we'd commercialised, the way that people used to get these maps was incredibly clunky, terrestrial fixed scanners, hours and hours of scanning and trying to join scans together to try and get these representations. We were the first company to market with a mobile scanner that gave you very high level accuracy of what your built environment looked like, but into a digital world. So when I joined, the company had been run by a husband and wife over here in the UK. Before I joined, they were a co-owner with us. But like I said, I was sitting on the board. I worked to get that company funded. And again, I'd worked with lots of researchers to get their companies funded. This was probably the first time where I began to front investors and ask for them almost to invest behind a company that I would come in and lead. And I think that's a key learning point, right? It's really different when you're asking someone for money to back you and how you need to portray yourself versus, if I was saying you should back Josh is great for X, Y, Z. Again, probably another moment in my career where I had to learn how do I back myself a bit more publicly and step up. That was an interesting journey. And then, coming into a company as CEO for the first time, had about 120 people in it, growing really strongly. How do you take the reins? How do you work with the original founders? How do you grow and execute on a strategy? I stayed there. I'm trying to think. It was about 1.5 years. I think, again, one thing I've learned as my career has gone on, what's my core strengths and where do I want to be? That company was a mix of hardware, software, and I didn't really have a strong background in the hardware space. And so, the field opportunity came along, which is, very software focused, real world built environments, which actually a lot of my consultancy time have been spent in. But then, to me, actually the most important thing, all of this is redundant if you can't get people to adopt systems and choose new ways of working. And field's got such a human element in terms of how do we make the life of a field worker better, that bit's been, a real piece of enjoyment for me during the field part of my career.
Sure. So yeah, well, I think it's a good time to talk and move into field now, because that's really one of the reasons why it's so crucial for me to have you on the podcast, because it's around. I think I get fascinated by the intersection of sustainability and business, and I suppose sustainable value creation. It's about how do we look at things that are the right thing to do and good for people, good for the planet, but also have a commercial angle that makes business sense, because they're not going to, organizations won't be invested in, or they're not going to generate a return, or they will stop being viable if they're not making money. So you have to try to work at this intersection where they're both there. So would you mind, for those that don't know about Field, explaining in a bit more detail what the technology is, I suppose how it was started, and perhaps sort of where you are at current date?
Yeah, so Field was originally created with the major UK gas distributor SGN, Boston Consulting Group, and Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, who's one of the world's biggest infrastructure investors. It actually came about because SGN was looking at how it executed its field workforce activities, still predominantly paper-based, and we see this across the utilities and the heavy civil sector, people using paper or just using what we call digital paper. And actually SGM was saying, it was about 2019, 2020, how could we be using digital technologies to improve quality? Because, that's got a very good link to sustainability. How do we improve safety? How do we improve productivity? We shouldn't be in a world anymore where all of these things feel like trade-offs and levers. We should, all boats rising in the harbour. We should be able to achieve this. And so Field was very purposefully built from the get-go to achieve on those outcomes for the execution phase of work. So, if I give a really simple example of where our technology is deployed, if you walk out the front of your house, your apartment, and you get a bit of a smell of gas, from the moment that somebody arrives on site, they begin the excavation, they fix the pipe, and we get to, the excavation being refilled, our software is used by thousands and thousands of workers that is doing that type of job, to help them stay safe and efficient in the field, to get work done right first time. And then we let information flow very seamlessly to remote managers. I think what we do very differently, though, is how we apply AI to that whole work stream. So we very much think about the remote managers. They used to drive site to site to site, sampling, busy, phone ringing all day, right? What we help them with is using data. How in the moment do we help them understand what they should focus their attention on? And how do we begin to predict how a day will unfold so that they can get ahead of the curve and stop problems before they even take place? If I kind of go back to what you said about needing purpose in your work, I'll probably shoot myself in the foot one day that I've got this on a recording. I always say to people that working in like a fintech, marketing tech would not be for me. What I love with Field is, I think the piece you've said, you've got to have like the financial outcome, and we drive great productivity gains, right? 10%, 12% uplifts in productivity in 6 weeks. But what gets my team out of bed? We achieve that outcome while driving down incidents and injuries by huge amounts, right? And these are safety critical injuries where where people get hurt on a daily basis. We've got customers that are reducing incidents and injuries by 20%. I always just think about, the family that has breakfast in the table at the morning and, someone walks out the door. Everybody should expect to come home safely at the end of the day. And, my ambition at Field is that we're a massive contributor to zero harm taking place in this industry. Massive ambition, but we should all have that in 2024. It should be a given. And then the sustainability piece, Josh, right? Like, if you just think very simply about people driving site to site to site sampling, our customers, which are major utilities, are driving down travel. I shouldn't use the word driving. They're reducing their travel by 50%, but just having less kilometres done, but then also getting work done right first time, because we've got remote supervision, we've got coaching. First time, job done successfully goes up massively. And I just think about, eliminating, bitumen and asphalt, etc., massive contributors to CO2. If you think about the emissions of all the heavy machinery that they use on site. So there's these really nice aspects to FYLD that I think if you, talk to most of the team, they're like, the productivity is a given, we've got to achieve it, but these things actually can let us feel really good about ourselves.
Sure. So from a safety perspective, so I understand the other areas that you said there, but from a safety perspective, what is it that the technology does that reduces the risk and therefore the incidents that you've seen?
Yeah. I guess in the first instance, if you talk to a field worker using, traditional types of safety management, which is 99% of the industry, they'll tell you that the safety checklists that they do, they're frequently about keeping directors out of jail. Or we discharged our obligations, we got them to do a checklist. They'll tell you it's about keeping insurance premiums down. There's a procedure we followed. Most of them won't actually say that this process is about keeping me safe. And that's what we really reimagined at FYLD. So if you think about now this traditional industry, ticking boxes, etc., we've got them to go out with a camera, just on their phone, very simple. They take maybe a 45, 60-second video. They tell us about the site. They tell us about what they're going to do. And they tell us about the risks that they see. And we analyse that information. We use natural language processing. We use computer vision. And we use reasoning engines to really understand that site. And if you think about FYLD like a coaching buddy, in the first instance, what we give them back is an assessment. We're like, here's what we heard you tell us. Is it right? Is it wrong? Because the humans still should be at the centre of this process and drive behavioural change. We also suggest to them from the computer vision and reasoning engines risks that they may not have seen on site. Right, so just in that first instance, we drive a massive behavioural change in the person on site. They're very aware of the risk. And they begin to counter it better. And I think that that's actually the biggest impact that we have, along with our customers can now get governance that on 100% of their jobs, a risk assessment was done before the work began, and that's never been possible before. So there's kind of that aspect at the start of the job. But if you think now as the day progresses, lots of these jobs go for 5-7 hours, people are taking some evidence. It might be a short video, it might be a voice note, it might be a photo, and they're communicating quite frequently with their remote manager. Again, what we find is the remote manager will just spot something. They'll be like, oh, that doesn't look like the boards and barriers are completely effective on that deep excavation. Can you just down tools for a minute and fix it? And, again, in an industry where you often get a lot of fear of retribution at the work site, where people are worried about productivity, etc., if I think, back to the purpose of this podcast, better than how I found it, what I think about with our field worker is actually we're enabling a cultural shift with our customers, right? We're going away from a world where things go wrong to a world of helping the person be better in the moment, but also helping remote people coach them, remote people with more experience on how they can keep themselves safe and effective on site. And again, I find that's a really nice part of the job. Sometimes I jump into the FYLD platform and I'm looking at what's going on, and you'll see people quite senior in organisations. They've jumped into a job and they've just left a little bit of feedback, like, great job, it's neat and tidy, it looks safe, have a great day. And it's really heartening to see people who are potentially a little bit invisible in organisations before being able to show what a great job they're doing.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And it almost sounds like there's obviously the technology, delivers what it needs to, but it almost sounds like you're also providing some of that consultancy guidance and advice to the business in when you're deploying it. It goes beyond just deploying a technology, but almost like, as you say, that cultural piece of how should you care for and look after your staff, and thinking about reimagining how you think about that. So I suppose there's benefits beyond just the technology deployment that actually start to create a cultural change in the organizations.
Yeah. I think you begin to see that positive upward spiral, right, of I feel valued in my job. It's not just I'm getting coaching to shorten a task by 10 minutes. I think just my fundamental belief, if you've got a happy workforce that's seen that their work is acknowledged and people are happy about it, you might get like another minute shaved off because they're happy and productive. But, going to that consultancy piece, when I look at FYLD's growth rate, and, we've just shut out last year with 3x in our revenue, and you might have seen that yesterday we were named in the top 20 startups in the UK. Like, when I look to how we're getting to these outcomes, I think that consultancy piece is important. We are a SaaS business. and therefore driving monthly recurrent revenue is absolutely crucial. But when I look at this industry, for too long, people go out, they hand over software and they almost wave goodbye. And at FYLD, we don't do that. We've got a very strong customer service ethic. What we're finding with most of our customers is they get that deployment done and then they kind of begin to say, I reckon we could solve this problem with FYLD. And, you know, a good example is a customer we've got in the water sector. Pollution problems are obviously highly prevalent, and they began to see how they could use FYLD and almost get multitasking done by operatives on site to get a better understanding of where pollutions might occur and how to get processes in place to both cut them down but really understand if they took place. So that kind of light touch consultancy, understanding how our technology can solve more problems and deliver even higher ROI for our customers, I think it's absolutely core to the culture that we have at FYLD.
Sure, and that was going to lead me nicely into my next question. So, firstly, I suppose for those who don't know, could you just give us an overview of sort of size and scale of the business? You know, how many employees do you have? You know, where are you now, and what are the goals and objectives that you're looking at over the coming 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, so we're at about 45, maybe 50 employees, but we've got 15, 20 open positions, particularly through our commercial customer team that we're filling at the moment, right? Because we are growing very quickly, and we've gone from that tipping point over 3 or 4 years where you're going to market, you're educating them about the art of the possible, and you're getting your early adopters, to it shifting to being a more mainstream technology, and we're really beginning to fill that market pool. You know, these team members are now spread. The UK is our home, but we've also got deployments across the US, Latin America, and we've just done our first deployment in Australia. So, you know, business is growing really well. In terms of funding, we're at about 27 million funded now from our investors. Despite the very tough market that we sit in at the moment, we did close a substantial round at the back end of last year, which we're very happy with and gives us quite a long runway to keep developing our product. You know, when I look at industry recognition of how well we're doing, the UK energy regulator Ofgem, they've now funded us to the extent of about £1.6 million in non-dilutive funding to advance our predictive analytics work. They're seeing the impact we can have in industry by predicting how a day will unfold and stop those problems in their tracks. And then, you know, we've won a plethora of awards across the last 12 months. We just got a Global Construction Tech Award, that video risk assessment, that's won multiple awards, Energy Innovation Awards. And, you know, again, for us, why do we go for these awards? They're obviously nice to have, but we want to make sure that year in, year out, our focus on cutting edge product that's solving business problems in a really great way. We want to make sure that we continue to have that ethos. And, you know, if you're pushing yourself to win 3-4 awards a year, you've got to think very differently about your product roadmap.
Sure. And I mean, it sounds like you've had a huge amount of success, but I'm sure it's not been as smooth as you've made it sound there. What have been some of the challenges you've faced in leading this business? And I suppose I like the authenticity of hearing about when things haven't gone so well. So perhaps some challenges you face, and what would you say has been the biggest mistake you've made, and how you've learned from it?
Okay. I would say the biggest challenge, we all, I think with hindsight, had a level of naivety about the step change we were asking our customers to make to run work sites with video. Right? If I think back, it was 2020, and they were all doing stuff on paper, and we're like, you can do it with a video and AI, it'll be right? I think that we had a high level of naivety. You know, everybody talks about with startups crossing the chasm. When I talked to my board about that now, I said, actually, I think with hindsight, we crossed 3 chasms. And so the hardest part, you know, we were very lucky and fortunate to have SGN as a, you know, anchor shareholder, anchor customer. And they have been a wonderful partner to us across the years. But it really took us maybe 15 months after that before we got another paying customer to come on board. And that was an exceptionally tough period where I think we really learnt some hard lessons about the shift that we're asking our customers to do. the proof points that we would need to be able to show them about why it works, and just also that these are safety critical industries, right? So the bar to experiment and do something different was probably higher than what we anticipated. So, that first 15 months, it was also COVID, right? And, the other thing I say to everybody is never, ever again in my life, if there's a global pandemic, am I starting a new startup? We started FYLD on, roughly the 1st of April 2020 as lockdown took place. And so we're taking a new technology to market when all we could do was meet people we didn't know on Zoom and try and sell to them. It was, the first 15, 18 months were incredibly difficult for us. But it was really funny as we got towards the end of 2021 and, customer number 2 signed, number 3 signed, number 4, we began to see what happens in this industry. You get that first mover going and you begin to build a steamroll effect. And that has been wonderful for us now. But yeah, there's a lot of blood, sweat and tears to get that moving. Biggest mistake we've made, I can only say the underestimation of back in 2020, the change we're asking people to do. I think if I had my time again, I would think very differently about maybe focusing on getting 2 or 3 people moving versus targeting a market more broadly and trying to get more case studies really early on to see if that could have triggered a difference in the market.
Yeah, I understand. And I remember back then, talking to lots of my contacts and people had heard of FYLD, but I suppose it was like, for some, it was a bit like that wacky technology that, we'll see if that works and lands, and then we'll start to come. And you're dealing with big oil, I suppose, kind of like oil tanker type organizations that take a long time to turn and to come on board. So using networks and trying to do that. And I know Carl's been a great kind of success in doing that within the business, which has been great. What about the future? Sorry, you go.
That's right. So the funniest story I can tell you, and I'll let the customer go unnamed, a massive organisation, anybody in this industry would know them. They asked us, could they do a trial? And, we used to do free trials. You've got no choice at first because you're almost in the position of begging people to work with you, right? And they said that they'd do a trial. It was a very unsuccessful trial. It kind of got shut down. And 12 months later, they called us again. And they said, can you come back out now and talk to us? And, of course, you're like, yes, we can, by which time we'd advanced enough that we're only doing, paid proof of values or things where people are actually contributing enough resource that we know we've got a chance of success. And they said, look, we should just fess up to you about 12 months ago what went on. They said, we like to have our finger on the pulse of new technologies. You were too young a company that we ever would have been able to go commercial with you, but we just wanted to get it in the hands of 2 or 3 of our field workers so we could see if this was something we should keep an eye on to the future, right? And then I just remember myself early days trying to keep my board with me that we can do this, and we'd really sold this opportunity up big. And, some of these things happen, but you can only laugh, and they're part of the startup journey.
For sure, yeah, absolutely, and it's part of what makes being in a startup so fun, and I know that from my own, my own experiences. What's on the agenda for the development of the product? Because you mentioned there around the pollution piece. Clearly, safety is a crucial and critical area for these organisations, but productivity, as you say, is something that it's going to make it commercially viable. But sustainability in the broader, I suppose, piece around the environmental management, I would foresee that there may be areas that other areas you're looking at with that as well. Could you tell us what's on the roadmap, if you can, share some sneak peeks into what you're looking at?
I can indeed. So the FYLD algorithms have now been to 500,000 work sites, right? And probably nowhere else in the world does somebody have a data set of what it takes to get a job done from start to end. And when you think about that data set, this isn't someone telling us what they want to tell us. This is like video, voice notes, WhatsApp style messaging. It is a very big database of what it takes to get a job done, right? So finally, we've reached a point. We've been doing predictive analytics for quite a while, but we've got that now absolute base of information to dig deep on how is a day going to unfold. When you're running a startup, you've always got to be doing that piece of research that everybody's like, you're never going to crack it. Things that I'm looking at is, can we predict how long a job will take? If I look at this industry, there's labour shortages everywhere. If we could predict how long jobs would take and enable dynamic scheduling, right, that's going to be a huge win on productivity. And this is the one that Ofgem's funding us for. If you just think about an experienced crew, a simple job, how can I predict that site at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is going to have something catastrophic happen so that I can get ahead of the curve and intervene? So, that prediction of how a day will unfold to enable earlier intervention. If I go to the sustainability piece, Josh, it's about like looking at quality in real time. Is something going wrong on this job that's going to result in rework? We don't want rework. It's expensive. It has sustainability impacts. So really that prediction piece about how a job will play out is crucial for us. But then, the other piece is about what our customer, their next set of problems are once they get that first release done. A lot of our customers are looking at how can we help them engage with their customers better. We've got a number of people talking to us about our quite discrete algorithms and could they be commercialised, in different ways and pushed into other people's products. So I think it will be an interesting year. We want to stay core to our product focus of that execution phase and owning, that segment of the market. But I think that some new opportunities will arise for us.
For sure. And what about longer term? What's the strategy for your investors and your SGN? I don't know how independent you are now from them or what that looks like. But what, if you can share again, what are the long term exit strategies or longer term plans that you're looking at?
So we sit in an interesting place. Ontario Teachers is a pension plan, and many people would say it's not completely normal for a pension plan to create startups like what they did with FYLD. They're looking across their entire portfolio and saying, where does digital data AI provide opportunity to build new businesses from scratch? FYLD is like one of the very early companies in the portfolio. We've always been one of the leading companies. We've commercialised, incredibly well, I think, because we actually solve a very big problem that exists in the world. This isn't a technology push. This is we've got a problem we'll pull. But, from that, what I do get with all of my shareholders is like, what is the proof point? So we're beginning to look 3-5 years down the track. How do we absolutely own that execution phase globally? We're still in I guess, a more nascent stage in the US, in LATAM, in Australia. How do we expand those global markets? How do we make sure that we're absolutely the execution work platform of choice? Beginning to look at things such as partnerships. We've got quite a lot of the very large technology providers into our sector, seeing what we're doing and the results we're having. So I think that people will be looking for some kind of event that shows them that the investment is valued by the market. I think that what remains core to me is that, for the next 5, 10, 15 years, we have to have that customer centricity if we want to achieve those outcomes, or we want to ensure that our customers, that this problem-solving consultancy style approach while remaining a SaaS business must remain core for us.
Sure. And I suppose back to the leadership piece then, with those lofty goals and ambitions, and clearly you've done a huge amount already on that. How do you as a leader ensure that the goals that you need to hit, or even to understand what those goals are achieved with, especially in the early days, the finite resources, the smaller teams? What's your leadership approach to the success that you've had?
I'd say right from the get-go, FYLD has been what we call anti-hierarchical, right? I will dig in and do the grunt work with the team as much as anybody else. And that's really important. It's something when we're interviewing, if people come in and they want to talk about how do I build a team, what will my responsibilities be? We're actually we recruit really smart people who've got grit and will just get stuff done, self-starters. We don't necessarily build teams per se. I don't have a micromanagement bone in my body. I don't have the attention span. If I need to go deep, I can, but it's not my natural style. And I think when you kind of couple those things together, what we've found at FYLD is it's a team that's really working at pace. There's a high level of autonomy. I always credit my co-founder Anish Patel. He is the most ridiculously focused person on OKRs, objectives and key results. And what I've actually really learned in working with Anish over 3.5 years is that if everybody clearly knows for the quarter what our objectives are and the key results that will demonstrate we achieved it, you can give people a lot of autonomy, because we know that we're aligned, we're going after the same things, but they can figure out how to get there on their own. And then I kind of think we look at more of a coach-player mentality, and a lot of the team will use me in that way. You know, open diary, they'll chuck in 15, 30 minutes and they'll shoot the breeze with me, they might get some coaching, but then we let them go off and get on their journey. And I think that what we see at FYLD is that our teams almost self-organise around both the biggest opportunities but the biggest risk for the business. Then also I think because I pretty much let people go once we set those objectives, if I do come in and say this is not high priority for us, there's a reasonably good level of respect, and it's not necessarily seen as micromanagement. It's more seen like, okay, Shelley's got the helicopter view, let's hear what she's saying and why. So I think if you've got that respect and trust, you've also got an ability when you need to give a clearer direction to give it to your team.
Sure. Well, I actually have to also credit Anish, because it was, and I'm probably ashamed to say it, but it was through working with you guys I first heard about OKRs, and I've implemented them within GS2 to, mix success to date, but we're getting better and we're understanding how to use them. And it's a learning process as to how to implement them correctly, but they can be hugely successful. And we've certainly seen that with a few of our key results last quarter, where we smashed them out of the park, and we definitely wouldn't have done them if we didn't have the focus on them. So I agree with that.
Yeah, and then, on the other side, my other co-founder, Carl Simons, anybody that listens to this that knows Carl, he's one of the most humanistic people that I have ever met, and his depth of care for people is huge. So, like on the one hand, Anish loves people as well, but very focused on the OKRs. On the other side, I get a voice of reason in my ear if ever I get too focused. And again, if I go to leadership style, I like to surround myself with people that will tell me the truth and not sugarcoat people. And, from a culture perspective, Carl is one of the best advisors I've ever had in that way.
Great. So a couple of final questions then. I suppose as a leader, of course in your own right, but clearly a successful female leader, other questions that we have from individuals who are on this journey is, how can I make it work? How can I have it all? The family and the job and making it successful. How have you balanced that? And I'm sure it's not as easy as you've made it look, but do you have any tips for aspiring future leaders who are females that are debating whether they can achieve both?
Yeah, I guess if I start with the whole kids piece and the balance, and we're 15 years on from when I had my family, and I think a world of Zoom has actually done wonders for letting people bring their whole self to work. One of the best bits of advice though I ever got was once you have your baby, bring them in so that when you run out the door to do X, Y, Z, people are not there goes Shelley again, but there's, have you ever met her son, right? So I have to take old world, 15 years ago is a long time, and bring it to today. But to me, there's an actual piece about just being upfront and honest about here are my commitments, here are my boundaries, here's where you can push me. If I go back to do what you say you're going to do every day of the week and a bit more, you begin to get that permission to bring your whole self to work and be open and honest about what your pressure points are. Beyond that, I would be lying if I said I had great balance. Again, if I go to the lower moments, when we won the construction tech competition last year, I had to go to Las Vegas on very short notice to, pitch in front of a big audience. The week before, I'd been in Toronto at a shareholder conference, and one of my kids had a crap day at school and, called me at 3 a.m. to tell me about it in tears, and that I'd travelled too much that year and he wanted me home. So, I think all that I can say is I try to be kind to myself. I'm not always kind to myself. And this year I'm looking at, as we do the recruitment, you've got to think about how you let yourself be successful. One of the things that we're looking at is ensuring that people that we're recruiting can maybe pick up some more of that travel load, so that this year for maybe 3 or 6 months I can, reduce it a little bit. I think it's about, if we talk about test and learn in a startup environment, there's a bit of test and learn at home that I do. I think the other thing I say to people as well, though, is there's such distinct periods with children, and, I always look at work-life balance that I have to adjust it every 6-9 months because my family gets to a different point. I think if I say what always comes last, it's, finding time to sit on the couch and chill and not do much is maybe the thing that I let go a bit. I also, try and make sure that we get a good number of holidays in remote locations where people can't get me on Wi-Fi. So I get a bit of purposeful recharge time.
For sure. And I saw, I think on your LinkedIn, am I right in saying that you have membership of Chief? I don't know whether that, the network, and whether that sort of helps engaging with others in similar positions, perhaps. I don't know how you found that and what that's been like for you.
I find fundamentally having like strong females around to talk to about some of this stuff is important, right? Like you don't need the coach, just cut back your hours or do this, that, and the other. Like I'm CEO of a company, as I said, we grew 3x last year, and investors that should be demanding of me, right? I find having a network of people that understand that and can actually give practical advice is super important versus, my family, as much as I love them, have multiple times in my career just said, oh, you should just take 3 months off, Shelley. So to me, those networks of people who are in similar positions are incredibly important for me.
Sure. So last question, and you mentioned it earlier in terms of the name of the podcast. It's about thinking about your legacy and what that's like. So for you, by the end of your career, what would you like your legacy to be to show that you have left the world better than you found it?
Yeah. I would start with the teams that I've built. One of my most proudest moments recently, we always call ourselves fielders, but we also have the field hers. And, in the technology, heavy civils, utilities industries, female at senior levels are still like massively underrepresented. The first legacy that I want to have, if I just think, the next 3-5 years of building field, I want to make sure that I have grown and progressed the careers in collaboration with them of multiple younger women in the team. We've got some absolute rock stars and, being able to look back, not generalistically, but actually, look to 10 or 15 women and say, I gave them that coach, I gave them that opportunity. That's really important to me. If I look to, the styles of workforces, I've always worked in industries where there are people, out in dangerous environments. And they often just don't feel the love that maybe they should from their employer, and often just because of the invisibility and the distance. If I can contribute to positive cultural change, and if I can have a large contribution to driving down the level of incidents and injuries, and I just go back to that first point that everybody that walks out the door should feel like they're going to come back through the door and they should feel safe in making that assumption. So I fundamentally hope at FYLD that we're really successful in our mission of a strong contribution to zero harm. And if in 5 or 10 years I leave this particular technology world behind, if I know I've had a substantial impact on incident injury rates, that to me will be something that, for the rest of my life I'll be very, very proud of.
For sure. Well, it sounds like with every other objective that you've set yourself in your career, you've been successful. So I'm sure you'll fulfil those as well. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been fantastic to really get to know you in more detail, and also the businesses that you've been part of. And I think a lot of great lessons for all aspiring leaders and current leaders on their journey in driving value creation. If people are keen to reach out, or perhaps not when you're in the far-flung locations trying to avoid humanity, but when you're online and engaged, are you happy for people to reach out to you or engage, or if they have any questions they'd like to ask you? And if so, would LinkedIn be the best platform for them to do that?
Yep, LinkedIn is definitely the best platform to hit me up on. Otherwise, if people go to our website, FYLD, which is FYLD.ai, there's also like an information request form there.
Brilliant. Well, look, thanks so much. And perhaps we'll have to have you on in sort of 18 months to 2 years to see how you've continued to grow and develop in that period of time. But it's been a pleasure today, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much, Shelley.
Thanks so much, Josh. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Better Than We Found It. I hope you have found value from this to support your own purpose-led journey. This episode was brought to you by GS2 Partnership, my organisation focused on providing talent solutions for sustainably focused organisations. We are driven by our purpose of connecting the people who believe in leaving the world better than we found it. If you are looking for a partner to support you with your hiring plans, or you are looking for your own career next steps, please reach out to us or personally drop me a message on LinkedIn. It's great to hear from listeners to the podcast, and I'd welcome the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.